Welcome to the Motoring Podcast, your weekly discussion of motoring news. This is episode 143 on Tuesday, the 31st of October, 2017. Hello, I'm Alan. And no Andrew tonight, which equally means I've completely forgotten to write a menu of things. So tonight we have some unauthorized in Japan. We've got to look and to see if bigger and heavier is necessarily better or necessarily worse. And a 1 out of 3 new cars is an automatic. Is it the automatic selection these days? God, that's almost as much thought as Andrew puts into these things. Probably less though. So we should be relatively quick this week. No follow-up either. I think everyone is everyone's recovering, or at least trying to recover from Tokyo last week. So relatively low news week once again. It's just been the season for it. Motor show after motor show after motor show means that there's this kind of peaks and troughs right the way through. So let's start off straight into the new news this time, and you might have noticed that there's been a few stories over the last couple of weeks initially about Nissan and about inspection processes and how this was a terrible thing, terrible reflection on Japanese quality after the Kobe Steel story came out a couple of weeks ago, where Kobe Steel, one of the world's largest, I'm gonna have to dig myself about 3 minutes in. One of the world's largest steel manufacturers basically misspec'd its steel. I'm going to say misspec'd because I haven't read enough to know whether it was intentional misspecking or lying, or if it is genuine specification issues with the steel that it had supplied to car manufacturers, not just in Japan, but in other countries as well. And there's been a lot of bowing and apologizing going on from people within Kobe for exactly following up on that story. But Nissan, it came out, has been incorrectly checking its vehicles since about 1979. And it's not so much that it's been incorrectly checking its vehicles, it's just that there have been unauthorized checks. Now, a big fuss about this was made to start with, and then people seem to actually read further into it and realize what it was about, and the whole thing kind of died off a little bit. But in Japan itself, it's been quite a major story. You see, the problem is that for vehicles to be registered in Japan, then they have to be signed off at the end of the production line by a qualified and authorized technician as part of that. The thing is that they haven't been. They've been being inspected, and people have been looking at them, but the inspectors themselves haven't necessarily been certified. So it's not been up to, they can't be certainly certain that it's up to the required levels. What this has meant is that actually there have been issues, and Nissan car plants in Japan and building vehicles for the Japanese domestic market haven't actually been able to build cars because they've had to shut down because they can't be sure that they've got the right level of inspector inspecting the vehicles at the end. So from their point of view, it's been pretty serious, and it has upset some of the flow of vehicles into the Japanese into the internal Japanese car market there. Vehicles being produced in Japan for export hasn't really made any difference to them whatsoever. So for you, for me, it's really not going to make any difference. If we've got vehicles on order that are coming from plants in Japan, the chances are they might even be earlier rather than later as a result of this, as they try and make up production by building for export whilst they sort this stuff out. It's not just Nissan now, though, it turns out that for the last 30 years, Subaru has been conducting what are called here by Automotive News Europe, and of course there'll be a link to more detailed stories in the show notes, but which have been termed improper inspections. So again, they've been following the same process for the last 30 years without realizing that it didn't actually follow it. Of course, both these cars are saying that they'll be reporting details of internal investigations to the Transport Ministry. And as the CEO, Yasuyuki Yoshinaga said at a press conference, at a news conference, the final inspection process is very important, and we acknowledge that we did not meet requirements. We used the same process for more than 30 years without realizing it did not meet ministry requirements. So I think that this is very much internal. This is one of these things that's been going on for years and years and years and years, and nobody realized that it didn't quite meet the government requirements. It's been checked once. Oh, I'm so sorry. It's been checked once, and now people are discovering that things aren't quite right. It doesn't have any safety impacts. It doesn't have, as far as we're aware, it doesn't have any safety impacts. It doesn't have any impact on the operation of the vehicle. And it doesn't mean that the vehicle is subpar in any way, shape, or form. It's purely that it hasn't had the appropriate tick in the box. Again, for those of us outside Japan, it really isn't a big deal. It really doesn't matter that much. But you might have heard and seen it being muttered about a little bit a couple of weeks ago. And I just thought that whilst it was a little bit quieter on the news front, then that would be a good time to just spend a couple of minutes talking about it and explaining that it's purely for Japanese market vehicles there. So up next, interesting one that I noticed, which is, it sounds like a statement of the bleeding obvious to most of us, but there's a new report out from the Global Fuel Economy Initiative, pointing out that new cars are getting taller, wider, and heavier. Yep. You're as surprised by that as I am, aren't you? But it's actually quite an interesting little report. The Global Fuel Economy Initiative, by the way, is a piece of work, a collaboration between some pretty serious and respected organizations. So there's the FIA Foundation, there's the UN Environment Agency, there's the International Council for Clean Transportation, International Energy Agency, and a couple of others. So it's a relatively serious one. It's a serious bunch, and what they say should be taken shouldn't be taken too lightly. It's not just what am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is it's not just a think tank that with funding from a very specific angle here. That's really what I'm trying to say. Although some would say that, of course, there's going to be a specific angle when you've got many environment groups like that. There's a link in the show notes to the full paper, but what there also is a summary, which is like 2 sides of A4, which is rather good. But the aim of the paper was to examine the trends in vehicle size, vehicle weight, and just look at what's happened over time, not just in the previous X number of years, but for example in the just in the evolution of names and of vehicles over time. Been looking really over the last 50 years or so, trying to see just how much, just to see how things and how trends have changed there. It's interesting because it looks right around the world, so it's not just focused in North America, it's not just focused in Europe, it is right around the place. And there's a couple of trends and a couple of bits which are probably worth talking about in this. whoops, this is a fold down desk. Let's try not to let it fall too far down. So they looked at a number of models around the world, really, sort of long-lasting model names. Now, I think that that's an interesting point because model names can mean different things. Vehicles can move from a category to category around the place. One of the ones that we're going to talk about, that it's very obvious that it has moved from something which was kind of, I don't know, 107 Igo jazz size to a much bigger car. Gee whiz, I will stop yawning eventually. I'm so sorry. To a much bigger car. So some of the badges and brands that they looked at, for example, of these longer lasting model names, is stuff like the Impala and the Caprice from the US, Voyager Town and Country, the 3 Series from BMW, the Renault Clio, and I assume the Renault 5 before it, actually, judging by the length of the line here, Ford Focus and Escort, the Golf, the Corolla, and the Honda Civic. The Honda Civic being a case in point, because it's increased in weight by more than 90% since it was introduced in 1972, meaning, you know, it's almost twice as heavy as the first generation Civic, which was a very different car. It's highlighted in this as being within the fast increase, the kind of fast increase zone on the graph, and I think that you do need to look at not just the nameplate but where that actually sits. Say originally the original Civic was kind of Fiesta sized, if not a little bit smaller. Now it's very much moved up two market sectors, really, to move it from that sort of B segment up into is it C segment? C segment's a standard, it's a golf size hatch. So it really has increased quite considerably in there. Worth mentioning that Golf, by the way, was increasing in size by a similar ratio up until the last few years. And again, it's percentage increase. Of course, if Golf started a little bit heavier, then it ends up a bit heavier. Stuff like the Impala and the Caprice have been around for a long time in the US, then US cars have generally gotten a bit smaller, believe it or not, on average. And when we look further through the report and we look at some of the other stuff to see the trends in vehicle size, then we see that the US is actually just about the only area of the region of the world, really, where average footprint has decreased. Even since 2005 to 2015, over that 10-year segment, and similarly, average weight has decreased as well, and that's despite SUVs and such like as well being introduced there. So some interesting graphs in there that show the difference. Pretty much everywhere has increased a little bit. I mean, some have gone up and down a bit. Africa, for example, and India, the weight has come and gone. Now, you can go, well, it's terrible, isn't it terrible? All these cars are getting heavier, and then you look at the cars that were being built and sold in India 10 years ago, and you've got Maruti Suzukis and these kind of things, based on the Suzuki Swift of many generations ago, and you think, well, that is basically a thin tinfoil shell wrapped around some slightly tougher tubes, but there's not much there. And nowadays, when we're looking at cars for that kind of area, like the Renault Kwid, for example, then we find that you've got a proper car with some proper safety mechanisms in there. The leaps and bounds in safety and in passenger and pedestrian safety in cars sold in India, for example, over the last 10 years is really huge, and it accounts for that. Well, it's about, what is it over the time? It's about 100 kilos. Yeah, about 100 kilos increase in weight in the vehicle in that time. And yet, in actual fact, the footprint's gone from about 3.1 square meters to 3.5 square meters. So it's increased a bit, not a huge amount. The weight's gone up a bit, but the amount of safety stuff in there is actually a good thing. The SUV demand seems to be worrying people. It seems to be worrying them as well. Just they're taller, they're heavier. Fuel economy is not as good. In general terms, by the way. In general terms, not thinking about anything in specific. And of course, and so whilst there are improvements in fuel economy over time, it's really they're saying it's limited consumption growth rather than actually help lower the numbers overall. Sorry, a lot of talking and a bit of a cold at the minute. So yeah, similarly, battery electric vehicles, partially hybrid electric vehicles, again, they're heavier, they're increasing the weight. One of the things they're talking about here is that people, rather than reducing weight, when there's an increase in battery density, manufacturers are using it to extend the range right at the minute. I think that that's something which will get to a point and then it will peak, much like it has done with mobile telephones. As the energy density gets better, then all of a sudden they'll discover they can actually start making the packs smaller rather than adding more and more range on. Range and range anxiety, as I know, is a major worry with electric cars, and it's a worry. It's something which puts people off buying new electric cars. So of course, naturally, the manufacturers are working their way around that. But they are still saying that there's an interesting point here, actually, about interior size shouldn't be used as a vehicle size metric, which I think is a good one. By interior size, I'm imagining they mean sort of number of people and possibly number of suitcases you can fit in as well. A bit like they do in when you're trying to book a hire car and you're saying, well, I've got 4 people and a couple of suitcases. Which car's the right size for that? That actually shouldn't be used as a metric. Number of passengers and stuff shouldn't necessarily be used as a vehicle size metric. That's pretty unrealistic because you can have 5 people. You can do that. You can say Range Rover only seats 4 people. That's a point, actually. One of the things it does point out is that generally SUVs are more footprint space efficient than traditional saloon cars. It does point out that whilst that does mean that they take up less space on the road, they are also taller, heavier, etc., etc., etc. Harmonizing definitions for vehicle segments. Harmonizing definitions are always a good thing. Should really help compare stuff around the world. And that there should be real-life fuel economy measurements along with lab tests. It's a really good little report. It's 2 sides of A4. I've talked around it quite a lot. What it has there is actually quite a bit more succinct than I just made it out to be. And of course, then there's the full report. Should you deign to download it, as ever, link to the site where you can get both of those from is in, or will be, because it's not there yet, in the show notes. What have we got coming up next? Oh yes, 1 in 3 cars, according to this motoring research article by Richard Alcock, 1 in 3 new cars is now an automatic. So I'm going to be honest, to me this isn't a huge deal. And neither is it moving on for a surprise as we move towards more and better automated manual gearboxes, as we move towards electric, hybrid, partially hybrid vehicles, then there's less and less demand for us to actually change gear. The systems in some of these are a little bit smarter than we can actually be. So yeah, and even right the way up to, your DSG Porsche 911 special editions and stuff, they only come with flappy paddles. then there is a move from automatic cars to automation, one way or the other. Personally, when I'm driving, as I tramp the motorways of the UK, or generally up and down between Heathrow and the Midlands right at the minute, you notice that the traffic densities are higher. There's more stop-start traffic on motorways and in towns. And frankly, automatics are much easier to drive the majority of the time. And these days, there's very rarely, does an automatic gearbox get caught in the wrong gear at the wrong time, unless you're certainly a modern one, unless you're, I don't know, going around the hill route at Millbrook, which is the only place that I generally tend to catch them out by lifting off in the wrong places and peaks and troughs and all these kind of things. Other things pointed out here, of course, is you get better residuals. I'm not really sure that bothers anyone at the time, to be honest, but it's worth pointing out that many of the automatics actually, whereas it used to be that they had, everybody go, oh, not buying an automatic, fuel economy is not as good. Fuel economy is not as good as it is when we, as it is on a manual, slower, all these things. In actual fact, many of the two-pedal cars out there with their automated manual gearboxes, with just modern, smart, automatic transmissions, and their control systems tend to actually produce less CO2, a better fuel economy, and such like. And that, of course, means that for Joe Physical Media Duplication Solution Consultants, or photocopy salesmen, as we used to call them, then that means lower benefit in kind and tax burdens for them. So, of course, they're going to run after it, just like they do with white cars and stuff. So, yeah. Do we need to save the manuals, I wonder? Is that something that we're going to need here in the UK and in Europe in the end? I don't know. I think it'll be a little while yet before manufacturers stop selling solo shift versions of the cars we know and love. Well, that's about halfway through. Well, gosh, I've talked far too much. About halfway through, if not a little bit further, and it's a point where I make you feel guilty. Are you feeling guilty yet? Good. So this is the point where I remind you about the ways that you can support Andrew and I in our work here on the Motoring Podcast. First of all, of course, if you haven't already, please do take a moment to rate and review the podcast, preferably on iTunes, which is the biggest and most comprehensive podcast network of the lot. But failing that, using the podcast playing platform of your choice. Most of them run their own internal review systems as well. So please do if you can, take a couple of moments of your time just to leave a review and a rating, preferably the rating, but the review makes a big difference too. If you've done that and you feel you really want to support the Motoring Podcast a little bit more, you want to get an email whenever new podcast episodes come out, you want perhaps to be able to watch myself and preferably Andrew and I recording this live, then if you head over to motoringpodcast.com and click the orange Become a Patron button on our front page, then it will take you to our Patreon page where all these things are explained to you about how you can support and what we expect you to get at each level. So please, if you can, take a couple of moments just to do that. It really does matter. We're in a great place right now, thanks to all of you guys in podcast charts and that kind of thing. And it is because one of the things that really helps that is our ratings and reviews. Makes a massive difference to all the podcast platform positionings out there. Alliteration, completely unintentional. in all of that. Anyway, I'll stop warbling about that, and we move on and talk about the rallying. So yeah, this last weekend saw. I've forgotten what the correct name of it is, the absolute correct name, which is terrible. I can't even see a reference here. But I'm just going to call it Rally Wales GB, which is possibly correct and possibly not. In the WRC, that's really maddening. Why does it not actually say in the article here on Autosport? Yeah, Rally GB. Okay, whatever. Anyway, big news, and what I was actually going to talk about rather than the name was Elfyn Evans claiming his first win for himself and at his home rally. I mean, obviously, from a name like that, he's definitely Welsh. So to have his first win in WRC and to have it on there in Wales is absolutely fantastic. Brilliant. So congratulations to you and everyone at M Sport. M Sport, a doubly good weekend because Sébastien Ogier managed to come in third again in his Ford Fiesta based WRC car, meaning that the M Sport World Rally team has won the World Rally Championship this year. Which is rather cool. It was a bit hit and miss for some of the others. Over the weekend. It wasn't a great weekend for Hyundai, who had fielded 4 cars in the hope of managing to keep their WRC hopes alive, but missed out. Oh God! But missed out to the Fords, obviously. Thierry Neuville. Some dumb stuff, just silly mistakes in places. Things like not actually having his time card to punch at the start, that kind of thing. For Hyundai, came in second. Sébastien Ogier, as we said, in third. Andreas Mikkelsen, again for Hyundai, came in fourth, and Jari-Matti Latvala came in for the Toyota Gazoo Racing WRC team in the Yaris. Driver standings: Ogier, Neuville, Tanak, Jari-Matti Latvala, Elfyn Evans in there at 5th place with 118 points overall. So yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. Great. I'm following. I haven't really been following. I did watch it. I did manage to catch some of the highlights from Saturday. Because I knew Andrew wasn't going to be here this week and that I was going to have to talk about it. So I figured I should have at least a little bit of knowledge. But yeah, great stuff. And you forget, I forget how good WRC is in between watching it. I ended up watching the Red Bull coverage because it was free and streams and all the kind of things that I like. So that's that. What's next? Oh, yeah. Here's an interesting one. He says, in the widest sense of it, and it's really this week's not a list of the week. I was looking up something completely different on the Reuters website, and I came across this excellent piece of photojournalism, a medium that works so well by audio podcast. On their Wider Image series, and this one's actually about life after death. It's entitled "Life After Death for the Love Bug in Ethiopia," and it's a short bit about keeping the beetle alive in Ethiopia, a car where it's been a country where it's really been the car for people on lower incomes for quite a long time. And just about, pictures of them being kept, of people working on them, and there's an interview and they talk to mechanics. who are still keeping them alive, and they're finding that okay, so they need so sometimes they need they need to have donor cars to keep some of the others running, and just the affection that there is for the beetle in Ethiopia, somewhere you wouldn't really expect it. Some lovely photos of beetles in all sorts of places, and yeah, it's just something a little bit different. So as ever, link in the show notes to that. But if you go to widerimage.reuters.com, you should be able to find that there. Of course, we'd much rather you went via our website because hits mean prizes in this game. This weekend coming up, this marks the start of the RAC's Motoring Week every year. And one of the starting points for that is always the Regent Street Motor Show. So this Saturday, 4th of November, the Regent Street Motor Show will be taking place. And it's presented by, and I love how weird this seems, Enjoy Illinois Route 66. So yes, it's being sponsored by Enjoy Illinois. So I'm expecting that, as well as the usual selection of hybrid, partly hybrid, and zero emission vehicles, or low and zero emission vehicles that will be on display by Go Ultra Low there on Regent Street on Saturday. There will be a fine selection of American cars as well. I believe there's probably going to be quite a few Renault hanging around the places too, as well as displays and all sorts of bits and pieces. Regent Street from Piccadilly Circus to Oxford Circus should all be pedestrianised as well. So it's a good Saturday for the family. If people need to go do shopping, they can do shopping whilst everyone else goes out and has a sniff around some classic and some more modern cars. Of course, hand in hand with that comes Sunday morning's amusement on the Mall, where it is the start of the London to Brighton Veteran Car Run, as ever. So much information about London to Brighton stuff, more than I can really talk about on here. So, yeah, if you go to veterancarrun.com, as ever, link in the show notes. But you probably all know that by now, especially as I said about 6 times in the few minutes I've been talking already. Then yeah, all the event info, the route, what kind of times you can expect. You can expect the up to 400 veteran cars that are running to be passing at various points. Then you can find all of that there, including complete entry lists, all these kind of things. So yeah, please go take a look, and then you can enjoy. You can hopefully enjoy some of these and enjoy seeing some of those. Everything from cycle cars right the way through. Yeah, steam vehicles. Wow, cool stuff. So yeah, that is happening this weekend as well. Which brings me to the and finally this week, and again, this one was via Jalopnik actually, which was, and I found myself watching it last night on YouTube. Is the two chaps trying to revive a truck that's been abandoned for 26 years? The guys from Junkyard Digs. And about Ford F250, pardon me, been abandoned in the woods since 1991. And they sort of looked at it and it was like, well, it's quite good. So yeah, so it's great stuff. It's well worth watching. It's about an hour and a half, I think, in total. There's five episodes they did of the 3 days it took them to try and get everything running in the V8. It's a bit less roadkill. It's like half. It's about half scrap heap challenge, half mighty car mods, really. when it comes down to it. It's kind of detailed. They're trying to do it reasonably well. Describes it brilliantly. Go have a look and enjoy it. I'd love to see more stuff from them. Actually, there are a few bits and pieces. I need to walk a little bit more. Watch a few more of them. But yeah, it's really good. So there'll be a link in the show notes to the Jalopnik article, and from there you can start watching the series of videos on YouTube. It really is rather good. So that's about it for this week. Really, as some parish notes. We'll be back next week. I'm not really sure what the plan is for next week yet, guys. Because I've got this. Yeah, I'm not quite sure how we're going to do this. Now I think about it, because I've got some podcasty stuff to do on Friday. I've got some podcasty stuff to do on Tuesday. Not going to get back early enough on Tuesday night to record. I'll see if Andrew's going to do the show on his own. If not, we might end up recording on a Wednesday. Yeah, that works. If not, we might end up recording on Wednesday. Definitely, we're recording a special edition on Thursday next week as well. So there should be quite a lot of content coming from us over the next couple of weeks. We'll let you know if we're going to be late. If it's not going to be the usual Tuesday night recording, Wednesday morning release, then we will tell you one way or t'other. But thank you very much for your understanding on that, because especially given that the next week's delays isn't caused by proper work, it's actually could be caused by doing cool stuff for Motoring Podcast. And don't forget, between now and then, you can give us any feedback. Share your thoughts for the show at Motoring Podcast on Twitter and Instagram, on Facebook, and on the contact page of motoringpodcast.com, the hub of all our activities. Please don't forget about Patreon or leaving a rating and review on iTunes or whichever podcast app you use. It really, as I said a few minutes ago, does matter. To get in touch with Andrew, search and tell him that he's a complete total slacker. Then you can search for Cracked Windscreen on Twitter and he will appear eventually. And to get in touch with me, it's best to use Twitter as well, where I'm at AJP Bradley, Bradley. We'll both be back next week at some point, but until then, I've been Alan Bradley, and he who isn't here has been Andrew Clues. But most of all, safe motoring.